Thanks for listening and subscribing to Learning More. It's Russ with you. All my guests are telling me I sound a little bit different these days. And I do. I still am fighting that little cold thing. That's the reason for a little delay too in getting the new season launched here. But we're doing it. We're getting these episodes out, which is a beautiful thing. A decent voice or not, I'm making it happen. So why do I like doing this? I'm helping to produce some other podcasts, right? And I'm doing this podcast. It's about pickleball. Yes, an entire podcast about pickleball, believe it or not. But you know what? It's great because it's helping me to actually learn the sport and actually get out there and actually start doing it, which is cool because, we all need some physical activity. Well, don't worry. I've actually got a show on that coming up later this season as well. But with that, right? I'm asking different questions, I'm learning different things. And I'm doing a little learning more segment where I'm asking something new each week on that podcast. And it just keeps reminding me about what I love about this podcast. I love learning new things each week. And this started as a New Year's resolution a few years back, and it's become this podcast. And I love sharing it with you. And there's a lot of topics out there that I don't think we talk enough about because maybe they're a little taboo, even though they probably shouldn't be. And the one that we're talking about today sort of falls in that category of something that's a difficult topic to talk about. So we just don't. We ignore it. And it causes, I think, more of what it's trying to prevent, which is grief. We all feel it. So today we are talking about grief and how to handle that. What do we do? How do we cope with loss? To do that, I have somebody that is her website is The Bad Widow. So we're going to get into that. But Alison Pena, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Russ.
And thanks for putting up with my voice. I'm going to be coughing sometimes during this, so you might have to take over the show. I'll just tell you that right now.
Okay.
I think you can do it. All right. So this, as I mentioned, is a difficult topic. It's something that generally people don't like to talk about, right? It's dealing with loss. It's dealing with difficulty. It's tough conversations. But yet you're all in on this. You've written a book, you've got a website, and you're helping others on this topic. Why did you choose this particular topic to focus
on? I am a widow. My husband died of pancreatic cancer at home in my arms on September 10th, 2016. And after he died, what I discovered is that people have a lot of misunderstandings about death, about widows, people who have lost someone, and in the absence of talking about it, what happens is that they jump in with what they think that they would want if they were in your situation.
Right, or how they would act, or how you should act, right?
And how you should act, exactly. Mm-hmm. And they're doing the best they can. So for the most part, it's such an uncomfortable conversation that if someone has anything going on about their own mortality, about grief as a topic, you can become a pariah. So they will actually stay away from you. There are a lot of stupid things that people say. They say, "How are you?" which on its face doesn't seem like a stupid thing to say, right? Seems like a normal, caring thing. Except after my husband died, I was looking forward to a horizon where I could see nothing but all these really confusing, tumultuous feelings and enormous pain, grief, fear, anger, shame, all at the same time, all the time. And so when they said, "How are you?" I had no answer.
Yeah.
I had no answer because in the moment that they were asking me, I couldn't see anything but the devastation that I was in the middle of.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I started, and so eventually I realized that these assumptions and this lack of communication between someone grieving and someone who wanted to help them but had no idea what to do led to a lot of misses.
Mm-hmm.
a lot of issues between the two people because it was well-meaning but wrong.
Yeah.
And what I would do in the face of someone saying something that just rubbed me the wrong way, he's in a better place.
Mm. Right.
You hear that a
Right.
lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I've heard that, and I don't think I've ever said that, but I've definitely heard that said to me.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what happens very often, one of the biggest casualties of grief is relationships. Because in the face of these misunderstandings, people saying stupid stuff, I literally, Dave had just died. There was a friend who was coming over that afternoon. And so I called the friend to say, don't come. He's just died. And he said, can I come over anyway and say goodbye? We were together 25 years. The idea of someone coming in that moment, wanting to come in that moment, even asking that, I mean, I was speechless. And he didn't mean anything wrong by it. The thing that I discovered was that people always mean well. They just get it wrong a lot.
Yeah.
And the reason they're getting it wrong is nobody's talking about it.
Right. Right.
And asking.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the thing, like something like, so I would say that the three things that you said there, saying those to somebody else, they might land okay. Right. Like, so it makes it where it's difficult. Like I always have, when I'm like, writing a card to somebody, after somebody's passed away, it's like, what do I write on the card? I struggle for, like, there was one time where literally, like, I was at work, and a coworker's parent had passed. I sat looking at that card for like 3 hours. Like, I don't know what to write because it's difficult, because I didn't know that person that well, the coworker, and I wanted to say the right things, and I just didn't want to say, like, personally, I'm not a fan of the, oh, I'm sorry. Like it feels weird. Like, why are you apologizing? Like, like, there's, everybody has something different. So, like, how should we, like, react to this? How do we have those, like, what's okay to say, what's not okay to say?
Be willing to make mistakes.
Okay.
So the fact of the matter is, if you're talking to someone, it is okay to say, I'm not sure what to do, but I want you to know that I am here for you. It's not helpful to say, what do you want or what do you need? Because that person may not know.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I said in my book is, if someone's grieving and you want to be of support to them, what you do is you have a conversation about how they're doing right now. What's going on? And listen closely to what they say. Do they need to have someone arrange a play date with their children so that they can just stand in the shower and cry without worrying them?
Mm-hmm.
Do they need food? Do they need someone to go out and have lunch? Because now they're alone.
Right.
And so by listening, you can actually make an offer that's helpful, as opposed to making an assumption of what might be helpful. And then do it, execute, asking for guidance as needed. When after Dave died, my husband, my family helped me with rent for a little while. So it was March, the year after he died, and my landlord called up and said, where's the rent? And I said, oh, you have it. She said, that ended last month. So the 23rd of March, I have no idea where the rent's coming from. And I thought, oh my gosh. I mean, I'm a resourceful person. I knew I would work it out. But I sat down and I wrote a blog post called Grief, Brain, and Bills. and just said, this just happened. I'm boggled. And I said just what I just said to you. If you have someone in your life like this, listen to what they have to say, make an offer based on what they said, follow through.
Yeah.
Within 20 minutes, my college roommate, freshman college roommate, who I had not seen in 10 years, who followed me on Facebook, messaged me and said, I'll pay your March rent.
Oh, nice.
And I said, I live in New York. Feel free to back out.
Yeah, it's a little pricey there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she said, nope, give me your landlord's name and they'll have it tomorrow.
That's great.
And it was kind of an example of one of the things that I discovered is that the reason why people who are grieving, especially grieving loss of a person, don't get what they want and need is that they're not specific enough, and the people who love them don't want to get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd rather do nothing.
Right. They sort of shut down, right?
Yeah. And if you do get it wrong, it's not atypical for that person to burst into tears or lash out.
Right.
And then the person who's trying to help is upset because they were doing their best. Like everyone is doing their best. But it's tough because we don't talk about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and even then, like I'm thinking, like, okay, I'll say like with my wife, like we've never had a conversation about grief. I except for when we're actually in it. You know, like when we're going through it, we'll talk about it. She'll, you know, she was like, I lost my father a few years ago, and she was fantastic, right? Like great, like the way that she handled everything and just sort of, you know, let me have my space at times and, you know, took the kids away at times and did, you know, things that were good because she just knows me so well. But that's not always the case, right? Like you don't always even know your spouse. So are you suggesting like maybe we should have, you know, maybe conversations about this in advance with our spouses?
I mean, I think it's helpful to have conversations in advance. And I want to also expand beyond just grief from death. Because the fact of
there's so much.
The matter is we grieve so many things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, people died of COVID. 8 to 10 people were affected by every single person who died of COVID.
Right.
If you think about the numbers, over 1 million people died. So that's over 8 to 10 million people who were affected.
Yeah. Right
now, we're seeing waves of layoffs happening.
Yep.
There's grief in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's even grief in, you know, like, I mean, I know this is minor, but you know, my daughter lost her AirPods, you know, like, and she's upset about that. And it's like, you know, like even those little things, they're important to people for, you know, like their own reasons. And it's tiny, but it's something that is impacting them. And you do have to be sensitive to that in whatever the case it is, no matter how big or small. Right. But you know, still, it's so hard to know like the right thing to say and the right thing. And I think really, I guess, I mean, I'm sort of boiling down what you're saying. I mean, a lot of it comes to paying attention to detail and just being a good listener and listening to the signals, both, you know, like if you're in the case of the person calling you to say, can I come visit? Like, maybe that's not the best time to do that based on what you were going through at that particular time. And, you know, the things that you were saying, and you're sort of telling him, don't come. And he's asking to come anyway. So you could sort of read that afterwards and think, but it's just so hard to do that in the situation. You know,
it's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard. And one of the very weird things that we do as a culture and as humans is we compare the grief. The grief of the iPods, the grief of loss of a job or a business, the grief of a divorce or a separation, the grief of a death. These are all things that we grieve. And yet I can't even tell you how many times I've heard, Well, fortunately, I haven't experienced that grief yet.
Mm, right.
But if we're having grief experiences from when we're small until the end of our lives, the fact that we don't talk about it so that we can communicate about it with each other and be supportive in a good way is a little
Hmm.
crazy.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. Um, okay. So each person in individual, like, they have their own, going through the grieving process. I feel like for me, and just, getting into like, when I lost my dad, so he died of, Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of like towards the end of where, his mind was going, and there were moments of where he, would be his old self, but there were, plenty of moments where he was not. But right at the end, as he's laying there, and we're sort of getting the feeling like, okay, this is the end. And he just like he looked
Yeah.
up and looked at my brother, looked at my sister, looked at me, looked at my mom, smiled, and closed his eyes. And it was
Yep.
like this, just it was weird, like, to describe a death as beautiful, but it really was. And I felt like just the way that he, like, that I was there for that last moment, and the way that he did it, it made my grieving process so much better. Like, I was able to handle it better because I saw, like, his appreciation at the end and all of these things. And the other thing is, I was able to say everything that I wanted to him prior to him passing, because there was such a long duration. And he was able to tell me things because I took over the bills and all this stuff. So he was telling me like where all this stuff is and how to handle it and do all of these different things.
Yeah.
Um, uh,